we can all shine for Jesus. Thank you for that. Our scripture reading is found in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. But Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God."
This morning it shouldn't be too hard for you to follow along if you've got your Bible and open it to the book of Ruth. That's where we're going to spend most of our time this morning. And the book of Ruth in the Jewish Bible is a little different than it is, of course, in ours, but it comes in the category in the Jewish Bible of the group they call the writings. And every year it's read during the festival season. Normally that would occur close to this time of the year. The harvest season there would be in April and May. And certainly this is a story, it's a love story, but it also occurs during the harvest season. It's also a story of redemption, and, if you will, even by analogy, it shows us the life, the Christian life that we should live. And so I want to take a look at that this morning. And there's so much packed into the book of Ruth that I actually want to go through it, if you will. Let's read it verse by verse, but maybe as we go through it, as I said, reflections, some of the things I've gotten from the chapter, and I have to admit, some of this as I've read and looked at it, other people have brought out some things here in the book of Ruth that I might not have thought about. And so this morning, I want to take a look at that. We start in chapter 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled," and if you go back to the book of Judges, it ends, and it says that at the time, at the end, when it ends the Judges, it says this was the time when there was no king. People did pretty much what they thought was right. And we know during the time of Eli that there wasn't a lot of strong, you might say, religious leading in the country. And so we're going back probably close to this time. And it says there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. And I hadn't realized until I looked somewhere else, but Bethlehem means house of bread. And how ironic that this family lived in the Bethlehem, this house of bread, leave to go to another country because of the famine. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. And if you look at the names, and of course it kind of gives us a portal into what's happening, but Mahlon means sickly, as one of the possible meanings for that. Chilion, pining, is in pining away. And it says in verse 3, "Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband." And of course we know as we read into the story, there were no grandchildren for her either. It says, "When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Now Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, 'Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, if you've shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord
grant each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Think of how difficult that must have been for Naomi. She's lost almost everything in her life, her husband and her 2 sons. She has no grandchildren. The only family she has left now is Orpah.
And yet, and mother-in-law sometimes probably get a bad rap. Here you find Ruth, she's not thinking about herself. And certainly as she heads back, the fact of thinking about someone there to help take care of her, it must have been very difficult. But here we find some of the character of Naomi. And she's willing to give up that emotional, you might say, support that she has and the physical support she has to see her daughter-in-laws maybe go back to a better place. It says, then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who would become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and they gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than you, because the Lord's hand is turned against me. At this they wept aloud again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. And here you find a third time, Naomi's pretty persistent. She wants to see something better for her daughters-in-law. And she says, look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Ruth pledged her willingness to abandon everything, her homeland, her people, her religion, her whole identity to follow Naomi. And when she says she'll die where you die, Ruth is committed. Even if Naomi dies, she says, I'm not turning back. Moab is no more. Judah is my home. Bethlehem is my home. Your people are my people. Even when you die, I will continue to stay there, and that's where I will be buried. Quite a statement for both of them. One, that Ruth is so dedicated to Naomi, and you have to think, what kind of life, what kind of example Naomi had that the love between the two of them was so close, that Ruth wanted to be where Naomi was. And we think of that in the Christian life. When people observe us, do they want to be where we are? Do they want to come to our church because they see us and see something in our life? And yet we find here that Ruth is drawn to Naomi and her character. And certainly we find also in Ruth a great character. She's willing to give up everything to go with her. And it says, so the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole time but it seems like God has turned his back on her. And everything has gone wrong. Her husband's gone, her sons are gone. She has no grandson, she has no future. She says, I'm empty. I've got nothing left. And it can happen to us
Now, in the way it was written, there was no chapters, but in our Bible we have chapters. And may I suggest that just like we change to a new chapter and we see a difference in Naomi's life, when we experience things like that, remember, it's not our whole life, but maybe a chapter in our life. God hasn't given up on us. And as we start chapter 2, and it said, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. The Bible throws that in there. We're given this little hint. There's a light there. And you know, we watch through, and as we go through this, we see the leading of God in her life, even though it looks at this point in her time like God has given up on her and has left her alone. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go in the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. As it turned out, it seems to imply that this is by chance. This wasn't by chance. And you know, some things in our life perhaps have happened to us and we don't even realize it. God is leading. At this time, when Ruth was there, she had no idea that God was behind this. She didn't even know who Boaz was, but God was there. One other thing, what was she doing? She was a gleaner, wasn't she? Does a gleaner sow? Do they own the land? Most of the time, no. A gleaner neither sows nor the seed nor nurtures the crop as it matures. Both of these jobs are the responsibility of the husbandman who owns the field. Thus, a gleaner is, by definition, one who is allowed to share in the benefits from the enterprise of another. What a wonderful analogy. God is the husbandman who is creating righteous character in us. And we, when we reach out to others, sometimes the seed has been planted and nurtured by God, and we have a chance to see the results of that. And we've probably seen that in our church where somebody comes in and we think, how did they find out? Where did this happen? God was at work before we got there. It says, just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Here we get an indication of the kind of man Boaz is. He greets his harvesters in the field, and not only is it a godly greeting, but you get the impression from the way they respond to him that this is a man that treats his workers well. Boaz asked of the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? We start in now, and we might say the first edges of what we call the love story. We don't know, but we can imagine Boaz looking out, and I'm sure it's somebody different he doesn't recognize, but maybe there's more to it too. He's thinking, who is that? Who is that wonderful woman that's out there in the field? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. And you know, that tells me a little something too. The overseer felt quite comfortable in allowing Ruth to glean in the field. He was quite sure that Boaz would be fine with that. And not only that, but during this time, they were supposed to leave the corners of the field and not glean this and leave that for those who needed to come behind them, the poor or maybe somebody passing through. But it wasn't always the case. In a lot of fields that didn't occur. The homeowner would have gleaned right up and taken all of the wheat or barley right up to the edge of the field and left nothing. So we see here not only is Boaz followed the rule, he's left something around the corner for those, but he's also seems to be willing to work with them, and his overseer understands that. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." This she bowed her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told about all you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." And when you look in Psalms 91, it talks about there, it says, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." Here in Boaz, we see him pointing back to that Christ figure. And I also think of Christ right before his crucifixion as he comes into Jerusalem. You find him crying. He's saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh, how I long to gather you like a mother chicken does her chicks." He's weeping. He has that tender heart. He wanted to help them. And Boaz here is falling under that same category. It would have been enough for him to just let Ruth do the harvesting and say, "That's your problem." But he recognized the dangers for a young woman that might have been around the harvest hands. And he said, "I've told them no one, they need to shape up and fly right, so to speak." Not only that, but he's saying, some people would have said, "Well, the well's over there. You get thirsty, go draw a drink of water." He said, "No, we've drawn water for everyone else. Go help yourself from that's already been drawn." "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvester, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some of the stalks from the bundles and leave them there for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." The work of a gleaner would have been pretty difficult. And Boaz wanted to make sure she would have something to take home. And he could have just given something and taken it to her, but probably didn't want to embarrass her and didn't want it to be known that he was helping her in her, you might say, harvest of grain. Not only that, but you see here it says she ate all she wanted and had some left over. I picture Boaz going over and pouring out a lot of the roasted grain for her, maybe showing the kindness, because if you think sometimes if somebody said, "Well, you can eat what you want," he might have thought, "Well, Ruth will go over, but she'll take a little, but maybe not all she'll need." And Boaz says, "I want her to have all she needs and more." So he probably poured it out thinking, "I don't want her to be shy about getting something. I'm going to pour out so much I know that if she's hungry, she'll get all that she wants to eat and more." We also find here, when we look at that, it talks about how Ruth was gleaning all morning long and not taking much time for rest. We find she's a hard worker. Not only is she a woman who's coming to love the Lord, not only is she a kindly woman in how she treats Naomi, but she's also a woman who knows how to work. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah, which is, depending on where you read, somebody will say a little less than a bushel, some will say over a bushel, or about 30 pounds. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Ruth was still thinking of her mother-in-law even while she was working. You might have thought, some people might have thought, well, I don't know if Boaz is going to be as nice to me tomorrow. I better tuck that away. I'm doing the hard work here. No, Naomi's at home. She could fix a little of this grain for herself, but that's not what Ruth does. And her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Normally, you would only get maybe a quart of grain coming behind the harvesters. Naomi picks up on this and says, something's a little different here. I need to ask some questions. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He's not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is a close relative. He's one of our guardian redeemers." You can almost see the mind of Naomi working a little bit. She's sitting here and she's watching Ruth talk about working with Boaz and how nice Boaz is. And you can just see her, maybe the wheel starting to turn. Kinsman redeemer, friendly to Ruth. Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all of my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." Naomi realizes how difficult it can be. It was not only a difficult task, but especially for a woman without any, she would have had no brothers, no one to look after her. She would have been an opportune target for a variety of reasons as a Moabite, either for people who were angry or for a multitude of reasons. And so Naomi realizes it's a very good place for her to be. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home." If you have a New King James or one of the others, it says, "I must find rest for you, where you will be well provided for." Again, you see Naomi thinking of Ruth. She's saying, "It's great that you're doing this. We have grain here, but it's not enough for a young woman. You need a stable home. While I'm still around, I need to find a place for you." And when you think of rest, I think as Boaz, if you think of him as kind of a Christ figure, if you will, in this story, we think too of as Naomi is talking to Ruth, she's giving her instructions as we go on. She's basically saying, go to Boaz and tell him to redeem the land and also to marry you. And it's there that you will find your rest. We as a church are looking forward to a marriage, aren't we? We're looking forward to rest. We find some rest today in Christ, but we're looking forward to that ultimate rest that we find when the marriage supper of the Lamb takes place. It says, "Now Boaz, with the women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying, then go uncover his feet and lie down. He will then tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Ruth has learned to trust her mother-in-law. She says she'll do it. She doesn't question it. Evidently, she's gotten very good advice from Naomi in the past. And Naomi understands a little bit of human nature. She says, this is a perfect time to go to Boaz. The harvest is done. He's going to be in a good mood. He's going to have a full tummy. this is the best time to present this question to Boaz and ask for the redemption of the land and for the marriage proposal. It says, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking, was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer of our family." And here is something else. It says, acting on Naomi's advice, Ruth expressed her desire to become the wife of Boaz. But you might say, this is a bold act. She's a Moabite. How would the average Jew think of a Moabite, even though they weren't at war at that time? They weren't highly thought of. And Ruth, she brings nothing to the table besides her character. She has no money. She has no standing in the community. In fact, she admits, she says, "I'm less than the female servants of your field," an unclean Gentile, so to speak. And yet, we find that Boaz reacts kindly to her. And if we can go back to the analogy of our life as a Christian, when we're baptized, don't we ask to be born into the family? We want to become part of that marriage to Jesus. And what does he promise us? It would have been enough if God would have said, okay, I've forgiven your sins and I'm going to let you live forever. But he's given us so much more. In Psalms 8, 4, and 5, David said, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? You made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor." But it goes on in John 1, 12 through 13, it tells of the potential to become part of the family of God. "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, but of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God." We get invited into the very family of God. We bring nothing to the table, do we? Just like Ruth came and said, "I'm a Moabite. I really have nothing to bring to the table to you, Boaz, but I'm asking you, please bring me into your family." And we as Christians have that same, you might say, something to look forward to. We come to Christ and say, "I bring nothing. In fact, just the opposite. Nothing here that you would want me in the family," but God says, "It's more than enough just to forgive you and give you eternal life. I want you in my family." And you find Boaz has that same response. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid." Boaz turns what might have been an uncomfortable situation where Ruth is coming to him and she's saying, "Please redeem us." She's asking for a favor in a way, isn't she? You're saying, as a kinsman redeemer, I know you've got that responsibility, so I'm coming to you. Will you do us a favor? And Boaz turns it on its head and says, "Oh, how kind you are. Coming to me. There's probably younger, better-looking men out there. Oh, I'm humbled that you would think of me. Thank you. Although it is true I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." Now, I've heard, and I know no Hebrew, so I can't tell you this, but somebody who knows Hebrew and read through this said where it says, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will do it," the sense of it is, I will most gladly do it. It gives a much more emphatic answer than we would read out of it in the English. Although Boaz loved Ruth and she loved him, Boaz had to redeem her first. And it's the same for us, isn't it? We're redeemed, and this book is all part of the, not only the harvest, but it's a love story, but it's a story of redemption. So Christ had to redeem us too. In Romans 5:8-10, it says, "But God demonstrated his love for us in this, while we were still sinners, alienated against him." That's what sinners is, isn't it? Those who are alienated against him. Christ died for us. Since we've now been justified by his blood, how much more we will be saved from God's wrath through him. For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Boaz was willing to do the redeeming just as Christ is for us. So it says, "So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said to her, 'No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor.' He also said, 'Bring me a shawl you are wearing and hold it out.' When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, 'How did it go, my daughter?' Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, 'He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Boaz was thinking of Naomi there too. One, he's letting, you might say, Naomi say, "I see your hand in this," but more than that. With the 6 measures of barley saying, "Naomi, don't worry. I'm going to take care of you. Things are going to be all right. I wanted you to know, even before this is all done, I've got you in mind. I'll be taking care of you." Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until we find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled." Sometimes we have to wait, don't we, for the answers we're looking for? And we find here that they do too. But we also find here something about the character of, again, of Boaz. It says the man will not rest until the matter is settled. I think it's not only for the love of Ruth that he does that, but I think this is the character of Boaz. He's not one to leave things lying on the table. He's saying there's another kinsman redeemer that would have first right, you might say, of redemption, but we're not going to let this lay around. He's either going to do it right away or I'm going to do it. We're going to take care of this matter quickly. Boaz went to the gate and sat down. He saw the in-law of the family that had spoken about pass by. So Boaz said, "Come here, friend, and sit down." So the man came and sat down. And Boaz took 10 of the leaders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then Boaz said to the close in-law, "Naomi is returned from the land of Moab. She's selling the piece of land which belonged to her brother Elimelech." And again, this is a clue maybe of how Boaz was thinking about Ruth, because I'm told, and again, I haven't bartered in that time, but it would have been common for somebody in the barter process to not clue their hand what was most important to them. They would talk about that which was less important first, and that was the land, holding back what was more important, and that was the marriage to Ruth. I thought I should let you know about it. Buy it in front of these who are sitting here and in front of the leaders of my people. If you buy it, then buy it. But if not, tell me you do not want to buy it, so that I may know, for you have the right to be the first one to buy it, and I after you. The man said, "I will buy it." Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from Naomi, you must take Ruth, the Moabite woman, also. She is the wife of the dead man. You must keep alive the name of the dead man on his land." Then the close in-law said, "I cannot buy it myself, because it might be my own children would not be able to own my land later. Take it yourself. I give you my right to buy it, for I cannot buy it." He was perhaps concerned that this first son that would be born would not be considered his. It was considered to be Naomi's son's or her grandson, but it would have been Naomi's descendants and Elimelech's descendants, not this man. And he's saying, but wait a minute. If I only have one child, one son, then everything could go to Elimelech's family and none of it would go to my family. No. That's not going to happen. It's possible, too, he wasn't thrilled about the fact that Ruth was a Moabite. But both of those were not a problem for Boaz. Boaz is okay with the fact he's a rich landowner. Certainly, if they only have one son and the land goes and this son is considered the grandson of Elimelech and Naomi, Boaz says it doesn't matter. That's not what I'm worried about. And I'm sure Boaz, too, thought that if God had led this far, he would continue to lead. So this is what was done in Israel. And of course, we read here that the relative takes off his sandal and gives it over, which was a signifying, you might say it was a signature on the document. It says, all the people in the gate and the leaders said, we have heard it. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built the house of Israel. May you become rich in Ephrathah and be known by all of Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, the son of Judah and Tamar, because the people of the Lord, because of the children, the Lord will give you by this young woman. And indeed, that's kind of prophetic, isn't it? Today we know who Boaz, his name is well known, but we don't know the name of the other fellow that was mentioned. His name is never recorded. And so, it says, so Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife, and he went to her, and the Lord made it possible for her to have a child, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, thanks be to the Lord, he has not left you without a family this day. May his name become known in all of Israel. May he bring you new life and strength while you are old. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and held him and became his nurse. And here you see this woman who was empty becoming full. This woman who had seen her family disappear, her husband and her 2 sons, now has a son and a daughter, if you will, in Boaz and Ruth, and she has a grandson. And her life is becoming full again. Another chapter in her life. The first chapter looked pretty bleak, but this chapter is looking up. The neighbor woman gave him a name. They said, a son has been born to Naomi, and they called him Obed. He's the father of Jesse, the father of David. And certainly there's something there for us too, when we get into those difficult times, to realize that there are other chapters ahead, that God still has plans for us. And the book of Ruth ends because it wants us to know the significance of what had happened. And it says, these are the children of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David. And of course, that's where they want us to take us to. But, you know, just as David was the king that brought, you might say, Israel to the height of its glory, there's also another king in that lineage, isn't there? Jesus Christ. And there's another kingdom coming, isn't there? And we get to be part of that kingdom. And just as we find the fullness of Ruth and Naomi, what seemed to be these widows that had no future, the chapter ends with their life full. And so it is for us as Christians. The time is coming. The wedding will be there when we will be married at the marriage feast of the Lamb, and our life will get its ultimate fulfillment there, and it will be complete, and it will be the rest that we look for. And you know, you look at the book of Ruth, and I'm sure I missed even more things in there that we could learn, but we look not only that, but we look at the integrity of these people that even at a time that was difficult, still continued to believe in God and wait, and God did answer their